Recap in minutes. In today's video, we will be enjoying a war drama film, entitled Blizzard of Souls. There will be spoilers ahead. Chill out and enjoy. The movie begins one very cold and dark evening in the year 1951. In the second year of the First World War, brave Latvian soldiers go against the ever-resilient German troops in an unknown forest. A young Latvian fighter named Artūrs Vanags steals himself as he navigates through the pitch-black woods. They were pinned down by the enemy pillbox, but after their commander boosted their morale, the whole Latvian regiment charged. 2 years earlier, brothers Artūrs and Edgars are on their way to see their parents in the Latvian countryside. As soon as they arrive, Artūrs immediately goes to his mom's bedside while Edgars continues walking to look for their father. Artūrs' peaceful moment with his mother was interrupted when a couple of German foot soldiers arrives on their humble farm in search of Russian spies. Artūrs' mother instructs the young lad to hide under the bed while she confronts the soldiers and hush their dog who's barking at the soldiers. Later, the Germans find 2 Russians hiding in the barn. As tensions got high, the German shoots the dog and kills Artūrs' mom in the process. The young teenager tries to avenge his mother but was too late. After the Vanags family held a funeral for their matriarch, they buried their valuables, killed their cattle, and joined the other Latvian refugees as the German army was just a few days away. Soon, Mr. Vanags and Artūrs lined up with hundreds of others to enlist in the army. Artūrs was denied because he was too young, but Mr. Vanags vouched for his son, stating that he got his permission to fight in the war. Mr. Vanags himself almost got denied because he was too old, but after an officer checked his papers and see that he served as a decorated marksman for 15 years, he was granted permission to re-enlist. Moments later, days of grueling training start. While the cadets were doing an attack drill, Spilva and the young Artūrs were fooling around, which led them to be punished by none other than Mr. Vanags, who was tasked to train and shape the young men into soldiers. Weeks into training, Artūrs' squad mates named Konrad and Mikkelsen are pranking each other when suddenly, a German biplane emerges. At first, the trainees thought it was one of their own and were staring at it. Good thing their master sergeant, Mr. Vanags, orders the cadets to take cover just in time before the plane dropped a bomb. With the Germans now beyond their doorsteps, the training ended. Arms and uniforms are distributed. Artūrs and the others are now part of the Latvian regular army, and their first orders are to head to the front lines. Days later, the fresh troops are in the trenches awaiting further orders. Aboard, Spilva pretends to hear something and shouts at the men to shut up. He then lets out a loud fart which caught the others off guard and causes them to laugh just as loud. Not a few minutes, a sound of a dropping bomb cuts off the fun, and everyone in the trenches ducks for cover. After the bombardment, Sergeant Vanags orders his men to attach bayonets and attack the enemy position. The thick fog provided ample cover for the Latvians as they crossed the killing zones and into the German side of the trenches. On the way, Spilva gets hit and died on the spot. It's the first time that Artūrs is part of the actual fighting. Despite the Germans being caught off guard, they weren't going down without a fight. The others had no problem fighting for their lives, but the young Artūrs were hesitant. Luckily, he faced off with a German who was just as hesitant. Artūrs' instincts kick in and he stabbed the German foot soldier that is as young as him. It was his first kill. The skirmish ended with the Latvians' overwhelming victory. Despite winning, to most of the fighters, it didn't feel like one. They marched back to camp, returned their weapons, and grabbed some grub. Later that night, Artūrs had a nightmare and woke up sweating bullets. Turns out, he wasn't the only one having bad dreams. Like the young Vanags, it was the first time for everyone in his platoon to experience such grueling fighting. The following day, the company commander visited the platoon and was ordered to stay in reserve tonight, meaning that they won't be fighting. The commander then called out to Artūrs and greets him with a happy birthday. Later that night, Edgars got Artūrs a pass to celebrate his 17th birthday. They went out to the nearby town bringing white wine and visited 2 local girls. Let's just say, the night ended pretty damn well for the brothers. The following day, an enemy sniper is picking out anyone who dares show their heads in the trenches. Konrads and Artūrs volunteered to take out the enemy marksmen in hopes of lessening their casualties. They found the sniper, but Artūrs hesitated once again in killing the enemy. The sniper manages to fire his gun and warn his allies about the attack. Konrads kills the enemy sniper and the 2 volunteers then retreat. On the way, Artūrs was hit in the back. Sergeant Vanags sees his injured son and carries him back to safety. By day's end, Artūrs is carried away to the hospital. Later, the teenage soldier undergoes an operation because the bullet pierced his back and ended on his neck. Artūrs was lucky to be alive. The bullet was just 2 millimeters away from his artery. If it just went the opposite direction by just a little, the story would have been different. Days had passed and Artūrs received a letter from his father, Sergeant Vanags. Many told his father that the young boy was dead, but nonetheless, Mr. Vanags believed his son is still alive. It started to get cold with winter coming, but Sergeant Vanags still managed to kill 30 men together with Konrads. While Artūrs was reading the letter, A volunteer nurse named Marta warns the teenage soldier to stop smoking. Arturs tries to impress Marta by blowing out smoke from his neck, but sad to say, the pretty volunteer wasn't as impressed. Months had passed and Artur's wound is almost healed. Edgar's and Conrad's visited Arturs to pick him up as he was about to leave for the front lines once again. Marta returned Artur's uniform, but before the young soldier leaves, the injured men start playing music and dancing. Arturs uses the opportunity to introduce himself to Marta and asked her for a dance. It was now summer, and the war with the Germans gets fiercer more than ever. By the time Arturs makes it back to the front lines, a German soldier is forced to stand up on their side of the trench as punishment. None of the Latvians fired their weapon, holding true to their morals that they're not executioners. But Mikkelsen gets agitated and starts trash talking with the Germans. A bit later, Arturs crawls his way to meet his father, who was strategically positioned away from the trenches and all camouflaged. Sergeant Vanags wipes mud on his son's face and orders him to shoot the punished enemy in hopes of teaching him a lesson to never hesitate again. But Arturs refused to pull the trigger and hesitated. The very same hesitation he showed which resulted in almost getting himself killed. Moments later, after a gas attack, Arturs went back to the same sniping position in search of his dad. He discovered his father's corpse alongside a dead enemy. The young soldier couldn't contain his emotions and started hitting the dead enemy's body with a wooden box. Not soon after, his father was buried alongside his rifle. The commander attends the funeral to pay his respects, and in honor of Sergeant Vanag's gallantry, a 21-gun salute was held. On Christmas of 1916, the Latvians allied themselves with the Russian Imperial Army and are now fighting alongside soldiers from Siberia. They were tasked to liberate the city of Jelgava. Once again, Arturs volunteers to be the tip of the spear. Edgars confronts his younger brother but decides to go with him instead. Later that night, under the freezing cold and moonless night, the Vanags brothers cut the barbed wires and crawl towards the enemy position to plant a bomb. They manage to set up the bomb successfully and signal to their comrades. The bomb explodes, making a gap in the German defense. The Latvians then charged at the enemy position. Despite losing many men, the Latvians overcome the enemy and take over the German camp. To celebrate the victory, the men cook some goose meat. Sometime later, the commander informs the men that they're going back to their initial position because the Siberians refused to attack last night. They could get surrounded, hence, they need to go back. The following day, men of the Latvian army endure the freezing cold on top of being bombarded by enemy artillery shells. Edgars crawls to his younger brother to try and increase his morale. After a brief exchange, Edgars positioned himself a few feet from Arturs. Suddenly, a shell hits Edgars. Arturs immediately tries to dig up his older brother's lifeless body. At the same time, the German infantry is advancing. After the Latvians killed a few, the commander orders the men to retreat back into the woods. In the woods, hundreds of bodies are piled up. Civilians check every one of the corpses in hopes of finding a family member or anyone they knew. Outraged by the Siberians' incompetence, Conrads pulls a Siberian officer down from his horse and asked for an explanation. The officer then shows leaflets from the communist. Lenin had promised to liberate Russia from the Tsar and give lands to the common man. To many Latvians, they too had enough of the Tsar and were thinking of joining the communists in their fight. Meanwhile, Marta and Arturs reunite. The volunteer nurse was trying to find her father after he didn't come back. Arturs promised to write her if he finds anything about her father. It's 1919, 3 years after the death of Edgars. Arturs had joined the revolution and fought for the Red Army. Arturs writes to Marta about the time he got injured in the leg and that Conrads and Mikkelsen carried him for over 20 kilometers. After his leg wound healed, Arturs returns home on board the train. On the way, he overhears a conversation between old men about the Latvian communists not fighting against the Germans. Instead, the Reds have started summary execution of anyone against the Communist Party. When the old men see Arturs, they bounced off the train. Finally, back to his homeland, Arturs joins his platoon in taking a quick shower. The commander welcomes the Arturs and asked about his leg injury. The young man jokingly responds that it got shorter. One communist officer then hands out a file to the commander which prompted him to order Arturs and the others to hurry up. Later, Arturs' unit was ordered to line up like a firing squad to execute deserters and traitors to the Communist Party. One of the men being lined up for execution is Mikkelsen, who starts Latvian folk songs. When the communist officer orders to fire, none of the Latvians pulls the trigger. Communist wearing red armbands points their gun at the firing squad. Arturs' old commander then convinces Conrad and the others to pull the trigger or it will be them who's going to be executed. With ordered once again to fire, the firing squad executes the order except for Arturs. The young soldier refuses to kill his countryman and comrade, which resulted in him being arrested. The commander then finished the job and kills Mikkelsen. During the evening, Conrads breaks out Arturs out of prison with the help of the commander. Arturs punched the commander in the face for the death of his dear friend. The commander explains that they would have been all shot dead by the Red Army if they didn't fire their weapon and kill the traitors. The commander did it to save what remains of his original men. Arturs and Conrads desert the communist army and hope to join the Latvian national forces that are forming in Sēsis. While walking in the meadow, a group of pursuers on horseback catches up. Conrads and Arturs try to flee into the nearby woods, but only the Arturs made it out alive. Alone and desperate, he goes to visit the only person left he knows, Marta. The young girl currently works as a farmhand and helps Arturs recover from his injury. It's been years since they've met, but in only written letters to each other since the harsh winter a few years back. The two shared the same feelings for each other, which made it hard for the lovers to part ways. After getting his health back, Arturs gave Marta his mother's ring and promised to come back after the fighting. The lad set his eyes on fighting for the National Army and made it to the gathering in Sēsis. As an experienced soldier, he was immediately welcomed and tasked to take charge of young volunteers and defend a railway bridge from an advancing enemy. Not soon after, the army of inexperienced kids was pinned down despite having the advantage position. With the enemy getting closer, Arturs takes it himself to show an example to the young ones how it is done. He calmly stood up, aim and shoot at the enemies, then takes cover to reload and repeat the process. Arturs shows the boys how it's done, and not soon after, the boys start following his lead. The ragtag group of armed kids manage to make the enemy turn their tails. The movie ends with Arturs seeing victory but ends up getting shot. He sits down and remembers the harsh winters a few years back, where he is joined by his brothers in arms. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this and to help the channel grow.